Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, just allow me to thank you for inviting me to speak at this very, very timely and topical conference. It's called a training workshop. I guess I'm being trained on higher education excellence in Malaysia. Actually, as a youngster who grew up in Singapore, so at one point, I actually was a Malaysian for 2 years, as you know, and held a Malaysian passport. The well-being of this region is always very dear to me. I'm currently at the University of Macau. You mentioned a lot of universities earlier this morning. I'll give you one sentence of what Macau is at the moment. In 2009, China's central government gave the approval of 1 square kilometer of land in China and then agreed to hand over the jurisdiction of that land to Macau. So this is not only a one nation, two systems scheme, it's an extension of the one nation, two systems scheme. And Macau government then poured in $2 billion to build this new campus. So I'm invited by the rector to work in Macau. I went there about 6 months ago. I left my job. I completed my job as vice president, senior vice president of National Tsinghua University in Taiwan. I think all of us would agree today, and we heard, first of all, I have to say that asking me to speak after Jasmine is very unfair. No one can have his level of energy. And now that he's no longer vice chancellor, he can speak freely. And, anyway, higher education, I think we all agree, is the pulse of a nation. When it is strong, so is the nation. There is one national issue which should be absolutely above politics. It should and must be education. So in addition, as someone who had devoted nearly 20 years of my professional careers to promote higher education globally, I felt that the main theme of this conference cannot be timed here. So please allow me to congratulate the organizers for organizing this very visionary conference. Now, the issues that's confronting Malaysia higher education, as I see it, and it was pointed out so brilliantly by my former two speakers, complex, multidimensional, and convoluted. Complex, multidimensional, and convoluted. It's not a subject one could cover in a finite time. In view of this constraint, I will only confine my discussion on what I see as the role of private universities, or even more specific, private research universities in Malaysia. I hope there will be other conferences in the future organized by our visionary leaders here, where other important and fundamental issues of Malaysian higher education infrastructure, both hard and soft, could be discussed. So here's that statement I showed earlier. I want to give you a case study. There was a lot of discussion earlier already about Korea. There were relatively little discussion about Taiwan. Let me use this case study. Korea versus Taiwan universities. I think that would give us some indication as to the kind of directions Malaysia may want to move in the future. Now, as someone who has been an administrator in the past decade and a half in public universities, the University of Texas at Dallas, National Cheng Kung University, National Tsinghua University, and now at the University of Macau, how on earth did I pick this topic? I think this may appear especially unusual because in Taiwan, private universities are hardly on the radar screen of anyone. So please allow me to tell you how I actually came to this revelation. I could almost pinpoint for you the moment when I suddenly realized how important it is private universities could play a role in higher education landscape. As I understand, many of the higher education leaders are here from Malaysia. On January 27 to 28, 2010, several colleagues and I at the National Cheng Kung University were graciously hosted by the then president of Seoul National University, President Yang Mo Lee. Our mission to the Seoul National University was surgical, very, very surgical. We were there to learn about the mission, process, and the internal and external challenges for Seoul National University to enter into its most profound transformation. And that is the transformation of corporatization. As someone probably you know, Seoul National since 2001 January made the bold move to do just that. Now, on the evening of our departure from Seoul, we were warmly hosted to a sumptuous Korean dinner by a longtime friend of mine, Dr. Yung Ok So. Dr. So is a renowned builder of science and technology in Korea. In the past 40 years, since his return from the United States after he completed his engineering education from Texas A&M University. He was a former science and technology minister, a CEO of several high-tech corporations in Korea, and a member of the board of regents of his alma mater, Texas A&M University. And during my tenure at the University of Texas at Dallas, I was actually extremely fortunate to have invited him to be a distinguished member of my scientific advisory board. So after the dinner, and just before we bid farewell to one another, Dr. So said one of the most profound and absolutely out of the blue statements about Korean higher education in our 2 days of meeting. He said the following: some 20 years ago, if you were to ask me which universities in Korea would be the top 20 in the country, I would probably find 15 national universities and 5 private ones. Today, the situation is completely reversed. This tells me that Korean higher education has come of age. Now, I know Dr. So very well. I also know how deeply loyal he is to his alma mater, Seoul National University. Such a statement stunned me. This comment was made while I was still working in a Taiwanese university, where I had noticed the Korean universities, certainly the top research universities, were surging ahead in intellectual strength. However, I had for a long time, as long as I could remember, considered Taiwanese and Korean universities were very similar, if not identical, in characteristics, in cultural and functionality. Therefore, this comment made by my good friend, Dr. So, hit me like a ton of bricks. So in order to really understand more deeply what Dr. So meant, I started to do some homework regarding Korean higher education. What I discovered completely altered my thinking about Asian higher education. So to get some precise information about this rather remarkable comment, I began to examine two, in my opinion, the most popular and the most trustworthy ranking systems of the universities: the Shanghai Jiao Tong University and the Times Higher Education. As I have emphasized about such rankings, however you like them emotionally and or intellectually, by themselves they could only tell you or convey information within their restricted boundaries. No more, no less. But together, they might tell you more. So I decided to look at that. So first, I look at the Shanghai Jiao Tong University ranking of the 2014 ranking of the Korean universities in the top 500. Here are they. You see Seoul National University and KAIST listed as two of the top ones. Korea University, SKK University, Yonsei, Hanyang, Kyunhee, Pohang, Catholic University of Korea, Ewha, Women's University, they are all private. Every single one. The only two public universities that remain, of course, they remain in the top two because they're pumped in by lots of money from the government. Those are the only two. So let me look at also the Times Higher Education of 2014 ranking in the top 400 globally. Again, you see Seoul National University and KAIST, 50 and 52. Pohang 62, I think was mentioned earlier by Ralph already. SKK University, Korea University, Yonsei, Ewha, and Hanyang. So you see that private universities in Korea stand shoulder to shoulder with the public ones. And there are many, many publics, they don't even show up. The only two that could compete with the private universities in Korea were the two that pumped in by a huge amount of money by the government. Literally using money to buy that ranking. So the data of these two ranking systems completely corroborated with the statement of Dr. So. In the Shanghai Jiao Tong ranking, except for the top two heavily funded public universities, SNU, which is a comprehensive university, and KAIST, a technological university, the rest are all private. The situation is even more striking for the Times Higher Education ranking. In the 8 Korean universities in the Times Higher Education top 400, only SNU and KAIST are listed. It is also worth noting that student to student and professor to professor, postdoc, I mentioned earlier again, a private university competes well with KAIST a public university. Indeed, in the campus of Potsdam is the only university in Korea that has the state-of-the-art synchrotron radiation facility that can do the world-class research in protein crystallography. That's the only one in Korea. So let's look at the Taiwan situation. The Shanghai Jiao Tong University 2014 ranking of Taiwan universities in the top 500. Here they are. Voila. You see one yellow sign. The red is all red. In other words, national universities overwhelms the private universities. Chang'an University is the only one that more or less hold a candle with the national universities. Well, let's look at the Times Higher Education also for the 2014 ranking. And here they are, already. So no private universities. I'm very happy that National Tsinghua, of course, is number 2. But you see, private universities don't play a role. Clearly, the complete opposite of the Korean and Taiwan education systems deserves a greater examination, which I will try to do here. First, without the slightest exaggeration, the palpable rise of the quality of private universities is challenging the national universities in intellectual leadership in Korea. In Taiwan, the dominance of national universities is nearly absolute or total. In public perception and in reality, the fact that the private universities are literally at the heels of the public universities in Korea must imply that the public ones, SNU and KAIST, absolutely cannot sit on their laurels. They better not sit on their ass and not do anything. It is worth noting that the 7 years I spent in Taiwan's 2 top public universities, I never felt the palpable intellectual presence of Taiwan's private universities. I never felt it. A very good friend of mine once mentioned to me that the Korean families, having sons and daughters accepted to private universities, are no shame. Are no shame. In fact, it is quite an honor. In Taiwan, it is quite the contrary. In my 7 years there, I have often heard from parents something to the effect that my son and daughter is not very smart, and therefore he or she cannot go to public universities. Now, this statement was made notwithstanding that there are terrible public universities in Taiwan. As the old saying goes, competition is really never a bad thing. A cursory survey of the data, it is clear that in global competition, Korean, especially Korean research universities, have surged ahead of Taiwan universities, unquestionably. While there are many factors for Taiwan universities downsliding in ranking, I am convinced that one of them is that the public universities felt no competition from the private counterparts and felt no necessity to reform or reinvent. They are too contented in their comfort zone. So it is worth mentioning that effective January 1st, 2001, Seoul National University made a giant leap in corporatizing the university, in that the university will hitherto be operated by a board of trustees. Similar to that in a state university in the United States. Of course, what it means is that the Korean government will not dip their hands into SNU business. I am absolutely convinced that one of the reasons why SNU would take such a bold move was because they felt the palpable competition coming from the private universities. Second, I was astounded by the fact that one of the top private universities in Korea, Yonsei University, with 40,000 students, has an annual budget of $2.8 billion US. To be able to operate with such a large annual budget must imply that the university has a very healthy endowment and a robust fundraising engine. Therefore, there is an old American saying, vision without funding is hallucination. The same is true with operating a university, especially a private one. To be able to meet the financial obligations year in and year out, it is critical that the private universities must have sound and healthy financial war chests. We often talked about the great private universities in the United States. Let me give you some numbers of their endowment. I think it was sort of mentioned earlier already. Harvard University now has 36 billion US dollars. B, not M. And in 2009, it was only 26 billion. That's because in 2008, it dropped by 8 billion or $9 billion. But it now went back up. Mentioned earlier, 22 billion in 2014 for Stanford, 12 billion in 2009, Princeton 21. Look at Caltech. Caltech only has 2 billion. But Caltech also only has 275 faculty members, 900 undergraduates, 1,200 graduate students. That's it. Okay? And University of Pennsylvania, the poorest of the Ivy League, has only 10 billion now. And it was down to 5 billion in 2009. They were literally digging their deep pocket to find money to operate. It is worth underscoring that as a small and young Korean private universities, mentioned earlier, 28 years of history, 400, actually less than that, 275 faculty members, and 3,500 students altogether. Pohang, or Postek, has an endowment of 1.3 US billion dollars. In many ways, this is comparable to Caltech. There is no comparable private institution in Taiwan. So, these numbers tell us that one of the real strengths of these private universities in Korea is that operationally they are financially independent from the government. While great universities such as Harvard University compete fiercely for the research funding from the US government, the running of the university is absolutely not dependent on it. I know of two anecdotes which can give us a clear indication as to their independence. The first was mentioned to me by Chancellor Yang Fujia, who was former president of China's Fudan University and former chancellor of the University of Nottingham in UK. In one of his visits to Harvard, he learned that when the US Secretary of Education, think of this, the US Secretary of Education made one of his visits to Harvard, the president of Harvard actually had no time to meet with him because he had more important guests he needed to entertain. Presumably, the importance of that guest is measured by how much donation they were going to make to Harvard. The second is during the 350th anniversary celebration of Harvard, President Ronald Reagan was invited to attend as a guest of honor. For that ceremony, Harvard made the following comment: Harvard University has decided to grant no honorary degrees at its 350th anniversary celebration next year, cutting short a heated debate among its faculty and students and alumni over the prospect that President Reagan would be among the degree recipients. Hell with President Reagan. Imagine having such a backbone when the university's financial viability depends on the government. For Korean private universities operating with such a strong financial situation must imply that it is quite, if not very, independent from the government interference. This is clearly not the case for Taiwan's private universities. No private universities in Taiwan would have such backbones in dealing with the Ministry of Education or the Minister of Education. No universities would have that backbone. So I think there is something profound here that is worth underscoring. In my 7 years in Taiwan, I did notice more and more funds raised by the university from the private sectors. Indeed, many building constructions in National Cheng Kung University and National Tsinghua University were generously funded by the private sector. However, I have seldom noticed any significant infusion of funds from the private sectors for intellectual enrichment, say in the form of an endowed chair or a vast multi-year research institute on a timely topic of global importance. I have not seen that. It is not obvious that the private sectors in Taiwan understand how critical it is for educational purposes to support the intellectual effort of higher education. One gets the feeling that the private sectors feel that such is or should be entirely the responsibility of the government. Unfortunately, whether the government, a la the Ministry of Education, understands operations of universities, private or public, is highly debatable. I do not know whether Korean private sector has overcome this hurdle, but the fact that their private universities are financially strong must imply to me that this hurdle must have been partially, if not fully, overcome. Third, the relationship between the government of South Korea and the higher education institutions must have reached a substantially more mature and sophisticated level than between the government of Taiwan and higher education institutions. The fact that there are significant similarities of South Korea and Taiwan in culture, economy, and social structure The rise of private universities in Korea must imply that the government, a la Ministry of Education, maintains a relatively hands-off attitude towards the private educational institutions. In the South Korean higher education landscape, the strong private universities will get stronger intellectually and financially, and the weak ones either diminish in stature or find alternative ways to survive, or simply shut down. Let the market take care of it. In Taiwan, the opposite is true. Government is deeply involved in the operations of private universities, despite the fact that there is looming danger of population drop. The Ministry of Education still cannot propose a reasonable policy to deal with its imminent eventuality. Fourth, just as private universities in the United States are legally owned by the respective Board of Trustees, BOT, so are the private universities in South Korea. This ownership must imply that there is or must be very clear legal and ethical codes and conducts the BOT must adhere to. There is a very subtle point about such ownership. Both private universities, BOTs, and the Board of Regents, BORs, of public universities are financially and intellectually responsible for the well-being of the university. However, there is a subtle difference here. Public universities' ethical conducts or funds are governed by government auditing, while the private university funds must have strong internal auditing system. For this reason, ensuring the financial robustness of private universities with careful management and the highest ethical standard, ethical conduct, present and in the future, must be transparent or it could easily be abused. Indeed, the cliche of slippery slope here is very operational. In addition, it also may imply that philanthropic contributions of higher education, especially for private universities, are socially and governmentally acceptable and encouraged. Academic structure of private universities must allow the presidents to engage in vigorous fundraising activities, just like those in the United States. It is worth noting that there are only few countries in the world where private universities could challenge the dominance of public universities. The United States is, of course, one. It's an off-scale one. While Japan and now South Korea are two other private universities, are highly visible at the societal level. So, lesson learned and implications from Malaysia. As I have mentioned from the outset, while I have 2 years of Malaysian passport, I'm de facto an outsider, looking into the Malaysian higher education landscape. With that in mind, let me, based on the aforementioned Korean and Taiwan case study, to cast some light on the situation of Malaysia. Malaysia, Taiwan, and Korea have very similar characteristics, as can be seen from the following table. Population, 51 million, 30 million, 23 million. Number of universities, 230, 100, approximately 160. The last is very important. population, Korea is single, it's essentially, Korea is single ethnicity, and Malaysia is multi-ethnicity. Taiwan, again, is single ethnicity. Sorry. So by the 21st century, all three regions exploded with the number of higher education institutions. Having such a large number of universities could itself be a challenge and could degrade the quality and quantity of higher education. That, unfortunately, is even more complex and is beyond the scope of my discussion here. Still, I think that the size of the population in tens of millions and large number of universities makes a compelling case to compare Korea, Malaysia, and Taiwan. Here is the QS ranking of Malaysia. They're all red. Now, why did I pick QS and not the other two? Well, it was mentioned earlier already, because the other two have no Malaysian universities in them. But that's not the case, not my issue here. My issue is that in some ranking, you see only public universities. So these 7 Malaysian universities are all public ones. In Malaysia, of course, there are a large number of private universities, such as Multimedia University, University of Technology Petronas, University Tunku Abdul Rahman, and of course, Sanho, and others. At the moment, I think it is fair to say that the private ones are not challenging the public ones and are not at the heels of the public ones. I think at the moment in Malaysia, the situation more like Taiwan and less like Korea. The pros and cons of the Taiwan-Korea comparison I mentioned before are very likely applicable to Malaysia as well. For example, the apparent Taiwan's higher education stagnation could be what is facing Malaysia's higher education as well, when the dominance of public institutions is so complete. Second, it is well known globally that the success of Malaysia as a nation is that it is one where multi-ethnic groups have lived and prospered harmoniously together. The multi-ethnic composition of Malaysia's population is, in my mind, unquestionably its strength, not its weakness. Yes, one of the most surprising and somewhat depressing aspects of Malaysia is that many of Malaysia's talented young people do either voluntarily or involuntarily wanting to pursue higher education outside of the country. For example, it is no secret that Malaysia's immediate neighbor Singapore does tap quite a bit into the talented pool of youngsters here. The same is true, although for a much lesser extent, for Taiwan, that we tap into Malaysia's talent, Hong Kong, mainland China, even my university, Macau now. And in my many visits to Singapore, I met many outstanding people in leadership positions on various arenas, and I found out that they're Malaysians. I suspect once a youngster leaves Malaysia for tertiary education, it is very likely that he or she will develop a subsequent career outside of Malaysia. So, this de facto constituted a brain drain, which Malaysia suffers quite a bit. For a progressive nation like Malaysia, I am sure this issue is, or should be, very high on the agendas of the government. So what makes a brain drain occur in Malaysia? The national universities such as those listed above, for one reason or another, are essentially out of reach and or out of bound by some of these talented Malaysian students. At the same time, to date, the private ones in Malaysia have not yet measured up in quality to the top national universities in order to fill in the gaps, to absorb and retain these talents for Malaysia. So in order to find their intellectual challenges, these outstanding students, whom I'm sure are encouraged by their parents as well, have to seek opportunities abroad. As I have clearly depicted in the comparison of Malaysia, Taiwan, and Korea, Malaysia is a multi-ethnic country. It's rather unique, and it is one which outsiders like me cannot and may not fully comprehend the political complexities. But education, I said from the beginning, is the lifeline of a nation. It's the lifeline of a nation. If there is one issue which should stand above politics in a nation, it surely must be education. Nevertheless, it is this reason, and even if there were no other reasons, that some of the private universities, such as Sunway University, should and must fill in the gap for Malaysia's national well-being, to prevent further erosion or brain drain, which I'm confident is hurting Malaysia as a forward and robust nation in Asia Pacific in the 21st century. However, the rise of public universities should not merely aim at filling the gap. That alone, while it is important at this point in time for Malaysia, is not sufficient for the creation of a world-class private university in the country. The creation of such a private university may help the country in the short run, but just like Korea, it should profoundly carry the intellectual burden and well-being for Malaysia in the long run. The creators of private universities in Malaysia must aim not just high, but higher. So my friends, how and what sort of world-class private university should one envision in Malaysia? Well, first, the private university should and must be financially independent, like what I've said. The examples of Korean private universities, especially a la Postdoc, tell volume about how financially strong is important. Pohang Steel Company provided and is still providing enormous and generous financial backing to the university. Can Malaysia's private sector support at least one world-class private institution? I have no doubt it can. Second, just as all world-class private universities worldwide, there must be an outstanding board of trustees who can provide profound intellectual and or deep financial support for the leadership of the university, a la the president. The BOT constitution must be clear and transparent. What powers they have and not have must be clearly spelled out. A member's term limit must be clearly specified. It should not be too short, so she is rendered powerless, or too long, so she becomes entrenched. Any university must be a not-for-profit organization. Therefore, members of the Board of Trustees must be individuals who could do this arduous job in a pro bono manner, but have the deep interest in educational issues as well as time and energy to serve. Each member must understand that the highest ethical standard is demanded of him or her. He, she also must understand that his or her role on the BOT, as well as the true mission and meaning of the particularly university he or she is serving. For a Malaysian private university, initially, the selection of the Board of Trustees is a sacred effort. I cannot underscore enough the profound importance of the structure and operations of a private university's Board of Trustees. I would even go as far to say that the rise and fall of a private university depends on the quality of its BOT. Third, searching for a leader as the president who is internationally powerful and visionary, sets high threshold as well as possessing a non-compromising attitude for intellectual quality. He, she must be eloquent and profound in substances, in speeches delivery, and politically courageous and savvy with smooth management skill. For president is not just a spokesman for the university he, she serves, but is an advocate for higher education for the nation. Fourth, it must be remembered that building a university must be either a slow or fast evolution and not a revolution. The best example I can think of, the person who fits this bill, is Harvard's president of 40 years, from 1869 to 1909. His name is Charles Eliot. He had one famous line. He said the following: a university in any worthy sense of the term must grow from seed. It cannot be transplanted from England, because at that time England and Germany is supposed to be the best, in full leaf and berry. When the American university appears, it will not be a copy of foreign institutions. Remember this, not a copy of foreign institutions or a hotbed plant, but the slow and natural outgrowth of American social and political habits. The American college is an institution without a parallel. The American university will be equally original. Equally original. With that, Eliot transformed what I always say, Harvard into Harvard, after 40 years of presidency. If my analysis of Malaysia is at least not completely off the mark, it seems to me that in higher education at least, it is unquestionably at the moment at a crossroad. One could continue on the current path and face a somewhat uncertain, if not an undesirable future. Or the private sector could jump in and create an entirely new era. It is my sincere hope that the examples of Korea and Taiwan will show us, meaning Malaysia, some useful indication as to which path Malaysia may prefer to take. Good luck, Malaysia.
I think this is a better presentation than mine. It is very interesting that Prof Feng has compared what has happened in Korea and in Taiwan, and he has given reason why private universities in Korea has succeeded. I learned a lot from this. And the other things that aeroplane which cannot take off. So many talented people are leaving this country, and those that are arriving are not fit.
Laboratories. I'm wondering then if the parallel or the links to Malaysia might fall apart a little, given that the chaebols, people like Samsung with poured tons of money in and so on, have very, very close links to the government.
So what is the question?
My question is it possible in Malaysia, given that a lot of the funding for private universities comes from the huge corporations that are very closely linked to the government?
Well, I think it's very clear that you have to look at what you want to achieve. In Korea, the chaebol, of course, has their own reason of supporting education. They want the best talents. Best talent make money for them. And they look around. For example, 30 years ago, a postdoc of mine in the University of Texas returned to Shinkangun University, SKK University in Korea, and he wrote to me, this is a disaster. The university is absolutely a disaster. But 20 years ago, Samsung stepped in. And Samsung said, I would like to pump in $1 billion for SKK University to transform you into a world-class university so that a large percentage of your students graduating from SKK University could come and work in Samsung. Nothing wrong with that. The same with Pohang Steel. But what have they done that Malaysia can learn from? Is that I have always worried, for example, gee, if Samsung stepped in like this, wouldn't they take away intellectual freedom? Wouldn't Pohang Steel take away intellectual freedom of Pohang Postec? Somehow the Korean industry have risen above that. They understood that what is important is that I want to be able to train young people that is world class and can learn very quickly when it's confronted with a new problem. You know, we all know very well, whatever we teach now to the students, we teach electrical engineering, we try to teach them how to do chip making. You know, in a few years' time, maybe chip making is no longer a business. They better find some new way of surviving. So what Pohang company said, I don't give a damn what you teach them, but make sure what they learn, the basic is so well, and that they meet the higher standard, and that they can see world-class people floating around them all the time. That's the kind of people I want. So I think that there's a lot of lessons Malaysia can learn.
Yes, sir.
I think whilst you make a very persuasive case in regard to Korea and Taiwan, one might forget the developmental state approach in both these economies are totally different from our development state approach. I'd like to see your reaction to that. And the second thing is, you and the other speakers have constantly reminded us of the importance of the size of R&D funds and so on and so forth. This is no doubt very persuasive too. But we all be reminded of the statement by was it Apple, the guy Apple, before his death, Steve Jobs, he said, it is not the size or the level of R&D that we experience in Apple that made us today. When we were compared to IBM and the bigger guys those days, we had no chance whatsoever. But it's the way we apply our R&D. I'd like to see your reaction to that.
I mean, I completely agree with you. You know, I didn't say size. I don't think I even mentioned the word size in my speech.
No, I was referring to the whole morning we were reminded of the size of the R&D and why these economies or universities take up.
R&D is not the size that is important, it's the mindset that is important. If you walk into Caltech, this tiny little school, I remember I asked Caltech's president when I visited him, I said, you know, you only have 900 undergraduates. You have 1,200 graduate students. And from the start, from the beginning of Caltech, you absolutely said, I never want my faculty number to go beyond 300. And your budget is about 300 million. Tiny budget for a university. How did you have the gall to operate the largest NASA center of NASA center that has $6 billion budget? You know, he said something to me that reminded me perhaps all universities should be very careful and say. He said, you know, we're small, but we don't think small. What that means is he's saying we need inherent self-confidence. One of the problems I see for Asians in the 21st century or even the 20th century, you know, I'll give you my in 1643 or 1642, because nobody for sure knows when is his birthday. Newton was born, Isaac Newton. Now, 1644 is the first emperor of the Qing dynasty. In other words, what the Chinese say, 老天爷, or whatever you want to call it. In 1643 gave the West the engine for modern thinking. And 1644 gave us 顺治皇帝. You know, that's very unfair. And so for 300 years, we slide downwards. By the time the 20th century comes around, we have things like, or the late 19th century, where the Japanese started to have Meiji Reformation. And the Chinese, by 1911, have the Republic of China Revolution. We suddenly woke up and said, my God, we're behind science and technology. So all of our universities want to do science and technology. We all go after science, you know, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, Hohang Science and Technology. We somehow forgot that we are a people of many millennia of culture. We lost our self-confidence. When we lose our, that's why I quoted Charles Eliot's words. Charles Eliot is telling us, don't just follow blind. Make sure that people develop self-confidence in a world-class university. It isn't how much you learn, it's how much confidence you can give to the young person. And if you cannot give that confidence to the young person, you fail.
Any more questions? Thank you.